like in a shallow bay. And if it wasn't for your misfortune, I'd be a heavenly person today. And I still find it so hard to say what I need to say. Tell me now, how do I feel? Okay. Let's look here. Hi there. So I'm gonna give a little bit of a background here. I'm using my newer phone to do the transmission, the broadcast. And I'm going to use my older phone to do a random number generator to pick from a list of 148 stories that I wrote down that I wanted to write. That was the initial idea. A friend had asked me to, I guess I can do it like this. A friend had asked me to write down some stories that I was telling one evening about my relationship with other dimensions or something. All the different times I had had spiritual experiences that I felt had greatly affected my life. Now, when I was living in New York City, I had this dogged obligation on my back to write a book. That was indeed the reason I decided to stop traveling and live in New York City. The main one was to write a book. And then secondly, become CEO of some company. Hola, Francesco. Ti amo. Le mare. Per te. Actually, I'll leave the ocean for a minute. I'll switch it back and forth. So I decided to eventually take myself off the hook and give up on writing a book because I just wasn't doing it. But then I found a clever way to trick myself. Well, I was writing all the time, but I just wasn't giving it the kind of structure it needed to be an actual book. And then I decided to trick myself into, I didn't actually decide, it just happened on accident, to trick myself into writing a book by giving myself writing projects to do every year for my birthday, which started as something I was just going to do for my 30th birthday, but then became every birthday kind of thing, where I would do some kind of like picture every day with a writing piece for every day that I was, one day for every year that I was that year. So for instance, on my 30th birthday, I tried to do this for 30 days. It's not that complicated, you get the idea. So on my 36, I think, I started giving the project a lot of structure, because I remember on my 35th, I was terribly tired of writing about myself. Somewhere when I turned 33, I stopped blogging publicly on LiveJournal because I got a stalker who made me very uncomfortable, and a good friend of mine was dying, and I felt the emotional pressure was not worth it. And everything had kind of shifted over to Facebook. I had been cross-posting things between Flickr and LiveJournal and Facebook. So I just gave up on blogging constantly, and I just did little projects on Facebook. But I do remember on my 35th birthday writing, maybe it was my 34th, but I think it was my 35th, writing, I'm so fucking sick of writing about myself. Right now I'm reading Love in the Time of Cholera, which I had thought might have something more to do with disease. And it does, but of course the main disease it's addressing is love, not cholera. Or the idea of love. Love itself is not a disease, but the idea of love is quite a disease. Especially when related to in certain ways. But in reading it today, I reflected on how much I would love to be able to write fiction. I've never tried to take classes to learn how to write fiction. I never did well in school, so I've never been one who's predisposed to want to go take more schooling. Did very bad at schooling when I was younger. It made me very uncomfortable and very unhappy, and I got bad grades. So we work with what we got. So I think it was 36, 37, and 38. The writing projects were very they became formalized. And 37 was, I think, a continuous story of my relationship with New York over all my years, which was a mildly successful memoir experience. And 38 was right after I had started Buddhist meditation retreats and was suffering terribly from a breakup and just, again, a realization of the collapse of all of my intentions, let's say. So my 38th year writing project was an attempt to dismantle my ego constructs, because the writing projects were all about ego anyway. So I was like, let's make it about ego in a very formal way. I don't know if it was fun, though. I don't think it was fun. But I just read that. I read a piece from it a couple days ago because somebody that I met here on the beach said, can you explain to me Dominic Vine of the Owls? What's the deal with that name? And I was like, oh, name. And I was like, I could tell him quickly or shortly, but I remember I wrote a piece about it at some point. Or rather, I had remembered that I had written explanations of it many times over the years. So I just searched through my notes, and in it I found one of the birthday posts from my 38th year when I was dismantling the ego construct of name. Name. Who are you? What's your name? What does your name mean? One of the things I didn't write about in there was, although I've often thought names were kind of arbitrary, although they do harness a certain type of power when you choose a name or take a name or are given a name. When I first started studying astrology, this is me just organically telling this story, not even rolling it out of the list. When I first started studying astrology, I didn't believe in astrology. I thought it was stupid. I thought horoscopes were stupid. People who believed in astrology was stupid. And a lot of the ignorant things people think about astrology, they're just like, why should I believe that the stars have something to do with like forcing me to be a certain way? I just thought it was dumb. But I was around people who talked astrology a lot, so I couldn't help, with my pattern recognition brain, noticing all the patterns that were coming up. I was like, like all of my friends are within a few signs of me. What is that about? All the guys I've ever fallen in love with have been Leos, except that one guy who was an Aries, and that's all fire signs. And then I looked at and I've got a grand trine of the fire sign. I don't know what that means. But I guess it kind of makes sense to me that my Mars is conjunct Saturn in Leo. I can make sense of that. So as I looked at it, the more I looked at it, the more I started making sense out of it. But of course, the more you look at anything, you also see the flaws in it. And in this, the astrology system we generally think of when we say astrology, it has nothing really to do with the stars, kind of. It kind of has something to do with the stars, but it's not. Like when we say Mars is in Leo, it's not in Leo, usually. In the last 5 degrees, it might be, but in all the degrees beforehand, it's actually in the sign before, because everything is off 25 degrees. And you might think that, okay, if that was the truth, when were the stars actually in that place? And it was like 20,000 years ago. So is the system somehow 20,000 years old, or is there another reason? India still uses the astrology that actually has something to do with what's happening in the sky. They have a very different take on everything. We won't get into go into all the differences, because even the intricacies of the system we use won't interest you. However, 2 years of studying it, reading a lot, and the way that I tended to believe mysticism, forbidden occult wisdom when I was younger, was not that you read about them in an encyclopedia or book, but that you just pour your attention into them and have the truth revealed. I was definitely into direct revelation, so I would just look, and I would offer people to do charts for them when I was living at the Massage School commune in the year 2000 in Northern California. We had a communal computer that was connected to a dial-up. I think it was a dial-up. I don't remember if we had to connect like through AOL or some kind of modem thing, or if it was always connected in an Ethernet. It was slow, but I remember using astro.com and building an account, and anybody who was interested, they would come and sit next to me, and I would do their chart, and I would look at it, and I would try to make sense of it, and I would turn to them and I'd be like, so yeah, I assume at some point in your childhood that something happened that made you just feel like you couldn't trust anybody, and that's been a huge problem for your whole life. And they're like, yeah, oh my God. And what, of course, a lot of people can say about astrology is these things are true for everyone. So you just say it and people think it has something to do with them. That's one of the critiques. Why not? Anyway, I had a whole list of doubts, but I also saw a lot of patterns. But perhaps like the way people see faces in the clouds or the rocks, our mind just projects things onto it. Or they're really there. But when I was in Amsterdam in 2002, I became friends with a Viennese artist who'd been living there a long time, who took me down to Rotterdam every Friday to dance zikr with a bunch of Iranian refugees. And the Sheik didn't speak English. He'd been studying it, but he didn't even speak Dutch. He spoke Farsi. And I've never been someone who likes gurus very much, or at least not in the way that you're supposed to like a guru, which is like worship their feet. And I've always, especially when I was younger, really liked the idea of seducing people in power and having sex with them. And especially if it was like a guru or something, like I would just pretend I was their friend, like I was on the same equal as them. Not insinuating that I'm a guru, but that they are nothing special. He responded to that very well. I do remember he was a Taurus. And happy Taurus to all of you bulls. And although we couldn't speak to each other directly, his sons translated for us, because his son spoke English and Farsi. And he had two sons that lived in this house or in the area with him. And they eventually asked me to be a dervish, and they eventually asked me to, which didn't require any conversion, it just required spinning. They taught me how to dance zikr properly, because I was like hippie dancing, and they're like, no, you just bow, trance dancing, different type, ancient trance dancing, as opposed to like electronic trance dancing. And then he started inviting me to stay over so he could teach me things or do rituals with me, which again, I just assumed we were going to have sex, because that's just where my mind was. And his sons kept laughing and saying things to me like, oh, I bet you have sex with 27 women a day. And I was like, living in Amsterdam at the time, I was having quite a lot of sex, but not with women. And one of them I took aside one morning and I said, you keep making jokes about me having sex with 27 women a day. Would it be bad if I had sex with 27 men a day? And his response was amazing to me. He just, without missing a beat, he said, well, how old are you? And I was like, 23, why? And he said, well, all men have sex with men growing up, but then when you turn 18, you're supposed to stop doing that and get married and only have sex with your wife. And I was like, are you married? And he said, no. And he was older than me. And the conversation stopped. But I was really impressed that somebody from what I, saw as like an Arabic culture, although Persian is different than Arabic, but I was pretty ignorant. But still, he would say, oh, all men have sex with men. That's, everybody does that. But then when you're 18, you're supposed to stop and only have sex with your wife. And I was just like, anyway, no, the Sheikh never had sex with me, but he did a couple rituals with me and gave me like a magical amulet, and he tried to teach me some stuff. And one of the things he tried to teach me, again, not being able to speak with me in English, it was a lot of gesticulation, writing things out, and occasionally asking people to translate. He wrote out a codex of the English phoneme system and how it related to the Farsi alphabet. And if I remember correctly, there are more letters in the Farsi alphabet than there are in the Roman alphabet. But we obviously have more phonemes than we have letters, because the phonemes can be used differently. So there was some codex of how the Farsi letters correlated with the phonemes of the English language and some numerical value applied to them. And then he showed me that if I added up the numerical value, according to this codex, of my first name plus the numerical value of my mother's first name and divided it by 12, I got the astrological sun sign I was born under. And I was like, what? Now, again, I'm a Gemini, which is the third sign in the zodiac, even though it takes place in June. The astrological year starts with Aries. So that's on the vernal equinox, generally around March 21st. So in many cultures, that's the beginning of the new year. There's a lot of different new years. In the culture I'm in right now, Mexico, before it was colonized, this area was not exactly Mayan. Actually, Mayan was a little further east of here. But one of the things that was really trendy when I was a kid was the dream spell Tzolk'in calendar. Hold on a second, talking to my sister. Doing a Facebook Live video now. There you go. Maybe she'll watch. She's like, do you want to chat? And I'm like, no, but I'll monologue and you can watch. What was I saying? What was I saying? I know the story I was telling, but I'm sure I was on a derivation that I've just forgotten the derivation. So I tried this codex trick. I was explaining the beginning of the year, and I was talking about the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar I like their New Year's somewhere in our July, and the calendar ends, and then there's a space that's not in the calendar, a day that's not in the calendar, and then the calendar begins again. So it's like, if you could imagine between December 31st and January 1st, there was a day that didn't have a number and didn't have a name. The Mayans had that, and it was called a day out of time. Or at least the dream spell version of the Tzolk'in presented this. So that was a day that I used to always celebrate as a new year. I also celebrated my birthday as a new year. I celebrated the arbitrary calendar new year, which is January 1st as a new year. And I celebrated the vernal equinox as a new year. And sometimes Beltane, because some cultures considered that New Year, which is another spring holiday or beginning of summer. And the summer solstice I sometimes celebrated as a new year, because why not? It's all just arbitrary, which is what we're talking about with time and astrology. Astrology to me is just a different way of interacting with time, where time has meaning as opposed to it just being the relics of colonialism from various empires shoved together that don't make sense. And people are like, well, I don't know, what does Wednesday mean? It just means Wednesday, doesn't it? Miércoles? Oh, is that relating to Mercury? Wednesday is the Rosicrucian day of Mercury. Oh, and so in the Latin calendars, they also called it the day of Mercury. But wait, what is Wednesday then? Wednesday isn't Mercury. What is, Woensdag is what they call it in some Germanic cultures. So it's from the Norse god Odin? That's what we'd say in our language. What does that have to do with our calendar? They're mystery. The kids I'm teaching yoga to, the guys I'm teaching yoga to, I was telling them about the calendar that we use, that months used to be months, right? This whole coronavirus thing started in early March, and the lockdown was hitting New York, and I saw these posts, people like, beware the Ides of March. And I'm like, oh, I remember when I thought the Ides of March meant the 15th of March, because nothing means anything in our culture anymore. But the Ides of March is specifically referring to when March was a month. Not just a month in name, which is our calendar, which I call our calendar arbitrary because nothing means anything in it, meaning that the word month refers to the moon, a moon cycle. So we call these things months that have nothing to do with the moon anymore. But when March was an actual month, meaning it related to the moon, the beginning of March was the new moon. And the end of March was the next new moon. So the middle of March, the Ides of March, was the full moon. Which everybody knows you have to beware of the full moon because the crazies are out and people act crazy. People act crazy on the full moon, like killing the fucking emperor, Beware the Ides of March. So, you learn something every day, but I was also telling them, I was like, I don't know what all the names of the calendar went through, because when I had my brain flip out about this, I didn't have the internet to access in the same way. But I know, for certain that September means the 7th month. And October means the 8th month, and November means the 9th month, and December means the 10th. But they're not, because September is 9, October is 10, November is 11, and December is 10. Total arbitrary calendar. Time. So when we talk about astrology, we're talking about how things fit into the seasons of the year, which again meant something to our ancestors more than it means now. But Aries, starting on what we call the vernal equinox, when indeed the day and the night are the same length, that's when the sun moves into Aries, but only in a number graph chart that we call an ephemeris, because actually the sun is still in early Pisces at that point, which doesn't mean anything anyway. or maybe it does, but these are archetypes we work with that give time meaning. And instead of time just being a circle with 12 numbers and 2 or 3 hands, if you have a second hand or not, it's kind of got infinite hands and the whole face is moving and all the numbers have metaphorical archetypal meaning that can be extrapolated and explored in mythologies that span all sorts of cultures. So it's really entertaining if you like symbolism. I'm a Gemini with a Virgo rising, both ruled by Mercury, which means that I love symbolism. Or does it? So the Sheik showed me that you can break down the phoneme system of any language, I guess, and apply it to this Farsi numerical system, and then add a name, a first name with a mother's first name, your first name with a mother's first name, divide it by 12, and get the astrological sun sign you were born under, with Aries being the first. And I was gobsmacked by that. I was mind blown. I was incredulous. So sitting there on the carpet in this house in Rotterdam, I wrote down, no, I tried it. I think I just did it one person after another on this little piece of paper that he had written out the numbers on. 9 other people that I knew besides myself, that I knew their birthday. Obviously I knew their first name because they were my friends, and I knew their mother's first name. I came up with a total of 10, and it worked for 9 out of those 10 people. One of them it didn't work for, and she was a redhead, so we all know that she was probably a demon. But the rest of them were humans, and I didn't know what to take about that. I mean, what it left in me was this sensation that there is some ineffable logic, or no, not logic, there is some ineffable order to existence that I cannot, from my human perspective, understand, yet is evidenced in this example about things that I thought were meaningless. I thought that, somebody calling you George or Mike or Harry or Dominic or Bill was pretty just random, and it didn't matter. So people could name their children Happy or Lucky or Moondog or Dweezil, and it's fine because it doesn't mean anything. But something about just the sound of the name, besides the etymology, the biblical references, whatever, there's a whole bunch of other layers of meaning you can extrapolate from names. But somewhere encoded in it was something related to what we call astrology that doesn't actually have anything to do with the stars, but has something to do with time. And time, of course, is one of the dimensions, the structures, the orders of the universe. And I mean, having this guy show this to me, and he's a sheikh, so he's supposedly wise. He's the leader of this group of Tasawwur Sufis. I was like, okay. So I guess Dominic actually means something, because at the time I was really like torn between being called Dominic or Vine. I didn't want to be called Dominic because I felt like it was too heavy. Dominus of the Lord and dominant, and I liked Vine. It seemed like less center stage, less egomaniacal. It being such a supple tree and not something so young. But I am a young wood horse, on fire, on fire, on fire. Does that illustrate a point? Is this evangelical? Okay, so if we're playing this game, I already correlated the random number generator with, as I told you, I showed you there's this list of stories. Hopefully I'll remember what the hell I was talking about when I bring it up. This is my random number generator. Random number generator. So I just played and came up with 104 before, but it wasn't this story. So I'm going to tap this and see what the next one is. 24. What is 24 in my list? And if any of you are watching this right now or in the future and saw and remember this from my 39th birthday when I came up with this project and did a few of them, I don't remember how many I did. I certainly did not do 39. I maybe did 20, maybe. It was when I was driving around in that van. So on this list, you see there's red X's. Those are stories I have not told. So 24 is a story that I have not told. And I think, even though I wrote down words here that have people's names in them, I'm not going to say them out loud to respect people's privacies, but I know what the story is, so I'm going to tell the story. Where are we going to start? Once upon a time, there was a boy I fell in love with when I was a boy. I think I met him when I was 13, and you know, when you fall in love with someone at first sight, you have this impression when you see them that, I don't know, they give off a light, they attract all your attention, everything else in reality pales in comparison to them. And before I became a sex monster, I would fall in love with people because I thought somehow they were going to enrich my life, which ranged all the way from they're going to teach me something amazing or just make life more interesting or somehow save me from this boring mediocrity that I'm horrified to be trapped in, rescue me and take me to, I didn't know Auntie Mame's story back then, but we all have the Auntie Mame story. This boy was maybe a year older than me. He was friends with some other kids that I thought were smart and cool. They were in like the advanced English classes, and I think at this time I was in remedial classes, but when I became friends with these people, I got moved into the advanced classes because I was like, oh, well, I'm just as smart as they are, even though they were much smarter than me. They thought I was smart, even though I thought I was dumb. So I thought, well, maybe I'm not really just like meant to be in remedial classes. Maybe I'm meant to be in advanced classes. Maybe that'll make it better. So I really became obsessed with this boy and kind of put up with the rest of his friends so I could be around him. So we'll talk about that kind of love, or obsession. But again, he was a Leo. He was definitely the first person I knew was a Leo. And as I mentioned earlier, when I started studying astrology, I later learned that like the majority of people that I fell in love with up to the point I was paying attention to astrology were Leos. So we had a fraught relationship of difficulty. We did a lot of bad things together. I remember that his parents and his friends' parents thought I was a bad influence. And I believe my parents thought he was a bad influence. We went to the prom together in full goth makeup, and I had him on a leash. No, I was holding hands with him, and a girl in full dominatrix leather outfit, but with a see-through taffeta skirt, or crinoline, see-through crinoline skirt, had me on a leash. And I was holding hands with him. We both had long hair and goth makeup. We didn't have beards, black lipstick and black eyes and black fingernail polish. My mother cried when she took pictures of us. So I loved him very much. But when I started traveling around America, I went to go stay with him in Arizona where he was going to college. And things got really messy because we did a lot of drugs together. We did drugs together starting in Indiana too, but every time he did LSD, we would do LSD or mushrooms together. And every time he did them, either with me or with someone else, is that entirely true? No, not every time with me, but every time he did them without me, and some of the times he did them with me, he ended up either arrested or institutionalized, like in a hospital, because he had some kind of fucking meltdown explosion. Friends, and which is getting to where this story is. So I definitely, when I was doing drugs as a kid, I thought that I always wanted to be a wizard when I was a kid. So when I did drugs as a kid, I thought that I was somehow accessing some magical realm. And if you've ever done LSD or mushrooms, there's obviously some kind of reference there of being like, oh wait, can I push through this mirror? Is there something on the other side of the wall? So one time, he had gotten a bunch of mushrooms, and this girl I was friends with had fallen in love with some other boy who she had given the name Syzygy to. So it's fair for me to say his name because it's not actually relating to him in any way, because it's a name she made up for him. And she thought she made up the word, but then we later found out it was a real word, so she had somehow heard it and then applied it to him. Or it came from the ether into her head and she applied it to him. Syzygy. But he was visiting Tucson. We were in Tucson. This was after me and my friend. I shouldn't use his secret name for himself. We'll call him Dog. We'll call him White Dog because I was talking about the Mayan calendar. I was the White Wizard. He was the White Dog. He was my guide, guided by heart. Hey, bud. Little Aries, sexy man. He had gotten a bunch of mushrooms. And he had this really good friend who had been lovers for a while with Allen Ginsberg and had gone and stayed with Burroughs in Kansas before Burroughs died. I mean, he was lovers with Ginsberg before Ginsberg died and had hung out with Burroughs a bit. I was very jealous because I wanted to be lovers with Ginsberg. And I certainly wanted to hang out with Burroughs, and both of them died before it happened. I tried, but I didn't. I had a ticket, I had plans, and then they died. He was at some kind of event in Tucson that night, and I think he had been drinking. But I think that's it. I think he'd been drinking alcohol. And the dog and Syzygy and I had gotten mushrooms. I believe specifically the dog had gotten mushrooms, and he had this beautiful teapot, and he had made a very, like, a quarter ounce, I don't know what it was. It was a lot of mushrooms, and he had made a whole pot of tea, and then we all had sat around and drank cups of tea, and then he started eating the mushroom bodies out of the teapot. And he had gotten a VHS tape of Window Liquor, I think, by Aphex Twin. I believe it had the Window Liquor video, the Ventolin video, and the Come to Daddy video. Oh, and Donkey Rhubarb. I might be speaking a totally insane language to you, but Aphex Twin is a musician from Cornwall who is very disturbing and strange and fun and interesting. And we had this VHS and we watched these 4 videos over and over as the mushrooms kicked in. Which, as you can imagine, would get kind of boring for someone who's multidimensional like myself. And the dog went into the kitchen in the dark and sat on the floor and was like eating these mushrooms out of the teapot. I believe before things got weird, Ginsberg's lover had come over and was asking what we were doing, and we told him, you know, before we were tripping, or maybe when we just started. He was like, yeah, I don't think I should have any mushrooms tonight. Do you guys have anything else interesting? And I had stolen a bunch of medication from a hospital I worked at for a while. I can't believe I'm not getting any comments from this. I had stolen some medication that I had from a hospital I worked at. I didn't know what the pills were. I just grabbed some random pills because, you know, kids are stupid. And I said, I think these are muscle relaxers. I wasn't sure. I think these are muscle relaxers, but they might be something else. And so he took some of the muscle relaxers, and then he went off back to the party. Ginsberg's lover. We'll just call him Ginsberg from here on out. And so we've been watching these videos, which are really interesting, fun / disturbing, for quite a while. Syzygy was sitting in front of me. I was sitting in a chair, and the dog had gone off into the dark in the kitchen to eat mushrooms and kind of just like flip out. And he was making noises alone in the dark. And I was getting bored. So I thought I would see if I could, because I thought I had a, one time that I had done microdots with the dog in Las Vegas, as you do. He had a girlfriend that was along for the trip, and at one point I felt like I was projecting energy underground through my feet into each of them and was making them act out emotional drama archetypes inside of myself. And I don't think she was tripping, but both of us were. So in this instance with the mushrooms with Syzygy, I was kind of, you know, getting bored with the video and the dog in the kitchen gibbering. And I thought, I wonder if I can do that on purpose. So I tried to open up my energy field, and because I had experiences like this, not on mushrooms, that I had noticed in my teenage years in Indiana. So it's like, I wonder if I can just open up my energy field and kind of possess his body and make his body do things like it were a puppet. And so like, I'm just, I'm sitting back in a chair and I'm just trying to feel my energy field move out into him. So this is all like precursors of my Qigong and yoga and just, again, wanting to be a wizard. And, I'm just like, how do I make my arm move? So I'm like feeling my own body, and then I look at him and I'm like, oh, there we go. And I just get his arm to come up over his head, and it comes back down. So I start doing this with him for, I don't know how much time. He's like doing this, he's doing this, he's turning. And again, this video is just on repeat, and he's just kind of zoned out, we're tripping, and I'm under the impression while tripping that I'm manipulating his body with my intention or my mind or whatever it was, third chakra maybe. But I was also aware that I was tripping, so I was like, dude, you're tripping. This isn't really happening. I wonder if I can make him do this. Can I make him speak? It was really hard to make him speak, like willfully. So Ginsberg came back at some point during this and went into the kitchen and tried to help the dog like ground, like just come like back into a semblance of self. It wasn't working, and I wasn't following what they were doing. I just noticed that Ginsberg was really trying to help the dog kind of bring himself together. And there was a little bit of shouting or whatever, but again, I'm like playing puppets with Syzygy, and all of a sudden, Ginsberg like comes out of the kitchen and he looks at me, and he like rummages around on the floor and he picks up a sock. And he puts the sock on my hand and then does this to it and makes my hand point at my face. And I think he's using his hands, and he makes my hand do this. And he says, why don't you go play puppets with yourself? Now again, there's a part of my mind that thinks I'm just tripping, but I am tripping pretty hard on mushrooms. And, the dog is gibbering away, and, oh God, I'm going to tell this whole story. It's so embarrassing. And when Ginsberg does this to me, I'm aware that Ginsberg's not on psychedelics. So Ginsberg is not tripping. He's a little drunk and perhaps on muscle relaxants, but how the fuck could he tell that I was manipulating this guy with my mind or whatever? Having validation, that's what a lot of these stories are about as well, is the idea that like, you can, hi, little Aries. My Aries are saying hello to me. You can imagine things about the world, like you have an imaginary friend, or that Jesus loves you because the Bible tells you so, or that you have that there are angels and demons speaking to you. I don't know, you can imagine all sorts of things. But if you don't have any real world validation, then you could just be schizophrenic or crazy or playing a game or joking or whatever. So a lot of these stories are relating to moments when, and then we have this person here who's always in multiple dimensions at the same time. So this person somehow perceives, this person who's not on mushrooms, he just had some alcohol and maybe muscle relaxants, is able to somehow perceive that I am invading someone else's personal body and manipulating them. What age am I at this time? I think 19. And he somehow tells me by saying, why don't you go play puppets with yourself? At this moment, a whole like house of cards collapses, and like a mirror becomes clear. And I realize there's an aspect of myself that is beyond my body. That is to say, the aspect of the self that that all people have access to. Like, one of the Buddhist concepts is that consciousness is just consciousness. It's not your consciousness. The way that the ego functions, you believe that your consciousness is your consciousness and that what you're seeing is what you're seeing. Whereas, from a different perspective, consciousness is everywhere. Consciousness is everything. And all of these vessels, these vehicles, have sensory organs that can feed consciousness data from, what is it now, 7.5 billion points of reference. I mean, not to mention all the butterflies and cats and lizards, right? So consciousness somehow had spoken to me and showed me that me projecting my control outside of my body and manipulating another person was inappropriate. It's impolite and what some people would call dark magic, the idea of taking away someone's willpower and manipulating them, which is something that society's built on it, on very physical ways like slavery and serfdom, and student loans and credit card debt. And then there's more nefarious ways like religions that are used to steal people's souls by telling them that they have a soul, making them believe that their soul belongs to someone for all eternity, and if you don't follow their rules, then you'll be tortured forever. There's some really sick shit out there about taking away people's liberty and freedom, all types of freedom, and actually understanding you're free from the tyranny of an ego is quite a freedom. So I had this resonant multidimensional awareness when he did this to me that I believed I was an ego, and I believed I was trapped in that ego, that myself stopped at my skin. And you're like, what are you talking about? But there was another part of me that was aware that I was everything, and that had believed it was limited to this world, this life, this body, and was horrified. So when he put this thing on my hand and he said, why don't you go play puppets with yourself? I jumped back and slammed myself against the wall and I started screaming. And he came over and he said, what's wrong? Like, Ginsberg had gone back into the kitchen right after he did this to try to help the dog come back together. And when I started screaming, he came over to me and Syzygy just kind of slumped down. He came over to me and he's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I was like, I'm trapped in an ego. I'm trapped in an ego. I believe that I'm a person and I don't know how to get out of here. And he was like, it's okay, calm down. So at this point, like, the evening escalates into all of us kind of having psychotic breaks. The dog starts gibbering in some Japanese he had learned and some French, and Syzygy is nonverbal, and Ginsberg says, we should go outside. So this is Tucson, Arizona in 1997 or 8, and I haven't been there in years, but it's a lot less developed than it is now. We were downtown, I think on 3rd Street. Oh no, that was when he was living in this little cottage by a parking lot. Like, it was just one of these little pink adobe houses that had another unit right next to it that wasn't occupied, but it was just two little things. And we walked outside into the night. I was terrified. The dog was a gibbering mess. And again, the dog was this person that I was totally in love with, this Leo guy. I had been in love with, but it just became so increasingly laboriously difficult to interact with him, and just constantly frustrating and disappointing that I was in this situation. So the Ginsberg was taking us out to like look at the stars. Again, he's not on mushrooms, so he's like, guys, look at the stars, look at how beautiful it is. And I'm just like, I just wish I could be free. And he was like, it's okay. And I'm like, ah. And the dog is again kind of having a meltdown. So I go somewhere inside of like a dimensional portal inside of myself, and I start taking all of the ego traits that I don't like. This is a theme in my life. Take all of these ego traits that I don't like about myself, the things I think are bad, like I'm a manipulator, I'm jealous, I'm dumb, I'm whatever. And I take all these traits and I open up a portal between me and the dog. And again, this was just something that seemed like it made sense and I was doing. And I put all of the negative stuff in him because I was like, we're not going to have a relationship. We're not going to be friends anymore. He's never going to love me the way I want him to love me. And he's a fucking mess. He's just smoking pot all the time and he's not doing anything with his life. I think he had just dropped out of college or something. And again, our friendship had been deteriorating. So somehow in my tripping mind, I decide to dump all of the character traits I didn't like into him and then close the portal. At this point, he starts screaming, my name is Dominic Sawinski. My name is Dominic Sawinski. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Because again, there's a part of me that thinks I'm just tripping and making this up and this is some ideal of what I'm doing. And then I'm getting weird validation that I actually just did this, that I had taken all these personality traits and shoved them in my friend and then closed it. It was horrible. It was so embarrassing. But this is all water under the bridge. It's just a story from 20-something years ago. And we wander into an old train yard that's in downtown Tucson. Oh man, Tucson. And again, like, Syzygy is nonverbal. He's like, and we don't have much of a relationship with Syzygy. Like, he's friends with this girl that we both had this weird, bizarre love triangle with. Like, she was in love with me, he was in love with her, I was in love with him, and we all liked each other, but the obsession was in this pattern, and she wasn't there. She was up in Oregon, she was living in Salem, and and Syzygy, we just didn't know very well. So I don't know if that's why he was nonverbal, but he was just kind of like going along. Or maybe it's because I turned him into a puppet and his ego had gotten disengaged. I don't know. But Ginsberg's still trying to get the dog to calm down. So I find myself standing over a gigantic sewer grate. Tucson is a desert city. It's at like 2,000 feet. It's dry most of the year. It has some rain in February usually, for a couple weeks maybe. But in August it rains, not all the time, but pretty severely for about a month, for the entire month of August. So there's arroyos, these dry riverbeds everywhere, washes, and in August they fill up with water, and huge floods sweep through the city. And even though they have these sewer grates everywhere that open to gigantic tunnels under the city. I mean, it's amazing, right? There's gigantic tunnels under the city. There are sewer grates that channel all the water from the floods for the flood season, the monsoon season. But they never were able, at least in the years that I lived there, which was only really 2. But I was always told by people that every year the city flooded. I saw, feet of water around things in August. So I'm standing over this sewer grate. What time of year is this? The Palo Verde were in bloom. I think it was the springtime. It wasn't super cold at night. And in Tucson, it gets pretty fucking cold at night in the winter. So it could have been April. I don't know. I could probably find that in my files, what time of year this was. But I'm standing over this sewer grate, right? I'm freaking out because I'm trying to figure out how to get out of being this horrible person. I don't know if any of you ever felt you were a horrible person when you were a teenager. I felt I was a horrible person and I wanted to somehow get out of being a horrible person. And I had some kind of multidimensional awareness that if somehow I could reboot, like, that's what I was obsessed with in my years of living in Arizona, was I kept trying to figure out how to get into, this is before the movie The Matrix, before I saw the movie The Matrix at least. I had this mythological frame story archetype that the world could just be turned off, erased, and rebooted, and evolution could all happen again. I didn't believe in God at the time, although I had a problem with Christ as a demigod, because he existed because people believed in him, and therefore whenever I was in the astral realms, I had to deal with him somehow. I don't think at this point I had made peace with him yet, but that's another story. But I had this idea that somehow I could be reborn, and not in a born-again Christian way, although maybe somewhat in a born-again Christian way, but more in the idea that I don't know if you felt this way, but at that age, at 19, I felt like I had wasted my life. I felt like I had made all the wrong choices. I felt like I was raised incorrectly. I felt like no one loved me enough. I didn't love myself enough. There was just this huge list of problems that I had no solution for. And spoiler alert, throughout my life, I never found a solution for. So then I did a Buddhist brainwashing thing a few years ago and just let everything go, which is a hell of a lot easier than trying to solve all the insolvable problems of an ego. But in this night, I'm trying to think, like, I guess this was a Buddhist solution even then. I was like, how do I solve all these problems? Okay, I can be reborn. How do you get reborn? You have to, and I was hanging on this thing. I'm standing over a sewer grate, and I think, if I can just let go of all attachment with myself, all association, all identification with myself, if I can let that go, then I can be reborn as someone else. And I just said, okay, how do you let go? And the answer I got was let go, let go, let go. And I was like, how do I let go? How do I let go? And again, I'm standing up at night, tripping on mushrooms over a sewer grate that opens very deep into these cavernous tunnels underneath. And I feel my body. I go out of my head into my body, and I notice my hands are clenched in fists. And one of the fists is holding something. And I'm like, what is my fist holding? And it's the sock that Ginsberg had put on my hand to tell me to go play puppets with myself. I'm like, oh. When I realize what it is, I open my hand and I feel it fall to the ground. When it falls to the ground, I also feel something else and then realize I'm pissing myself. And I go, oh. And then I fall. I just collapse. Now, it's not like the sewer grate breaks or anything. I just let go of my entire body and I collapse to the ground and blacked out. Some undetermined amount of time later, I wake up and Ginsberg is sitting right next to me with his hand on my chest or something. Or yeah, he's touching me. He had his hand on my chest. And all I can see, because I can't move, is the stars. There's no lights around there. It's black night sky. I see the stars, and Ginsberg looks like Allen Ginsberg. He doesn't look like the boy that he actually was. He looks like Allen Ginsberg, and I'm like, oh, Allen, thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna cry. Thank you so much for being here. I need help. And he's like, you're okay. I don't even think he used any words. He didn't use any words. His presence was just like, you're okay. And Ginsberg, Allen Ginsberg, I was obsessed with as a teenager for just a few years, really, 15. I was 19 at this time. It seems like eons when you're that age. And Ginsberg was like a spiritual Bacchus, poet, wizard, archetype of creativity and wisdom to me. So he was sitting there, channeled. I mean, he had had sex with this boy, and so he was just in the boy's body, even though he was dead. He was sitting there, and I was like, oh, it's so good to see you. And I closed my eyes again, and a period of time goes by, and then I open them, and I'm alone. And I start walking around, and I've become unstuck in time and place, which I had never read Slaughterhouse-Five at that point in my life, but I just read it last year, and that's the main character, and that becomes unstuck in time. So it's a good way to describe it, to use those words if you've read that book. That basically every step I took, I was at a different point in my life and in a different place I had been. So I would take a step and I'd be in Indiana, and then I'd take a step and I'd be in LA, and then I'd take a step and I'd be in Oregon, and then take a step and be in England, London, Paris, because even at 19 I already been all these places, Denver. And I was trying to decide who I wanted to be. It's like, great, you're a clean slate, then who do you want to be? And I was like, I don't want to be him, I don't want to be me, I don't want to be, who do you want to be? And I was trying to just put some pieces together and try to find a place I wanted to be, but it was just a running, which was what I was obsessed with as a teenager. So I'm like, every step no, I don't want to be here, no, I don't want to be this, I don't want to be this when, I don't want to be this where, no. And then all of a sudden Ginsberg's in front of me again, but his glasses are broken and bent. One of the lenses is broken and the other one is twisted and bent, and the whole frame is twisted and bent, and his lip is bleeding and he has blood coming out of his nose, and I'm like, what happened? And he was like, I'm so glad I found you. And we'll just use the name that I've been saying earlier. He's like, the dog is gone. And I was like, yeah. yeah, that's probably what should happen. And he's like, no, he's gone. The police came and took him away. But I was thinking like that I had dumped all of this terrible stuff that I didn't want to have in myself anymore in him. So I was basically throwing him away. So it would make sense that he was gone. Like my mind was just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And he said, no, the police came. And I was like, what do you mean the police came? And he said, he turned into a swarm of bees and tried to destroy the universe, which totally made sense to me. But I said, what do you mean? And he said, he went back to his apartment and just started to destroy everything. And I was like, what? I said, what happened to Syzygy? And he was like, I don't know. He ran off and I haven't seen him. And he was like, I'm so glad I found you. And I was like, so where's the dog right now? And he's like, they took him away in a police car. And I was like, can we go back to the apartment? And he was like, well, they locked it, but I think we can break in through the bathroom window, because I had left all my stuff in there and Syzygy had left his stuff in there. And we were afraid that the cops were going to come search the house later or something and find drugs. So we went into the house and we broke in through the bathroom window and found all the drugs and got all of our stuff and got out of there. And I think I had other friends I could stay with. And we eventually ran into Syzygy, who had fallen asleep in the Greyhound bus station. And then we were able to find him and give him his stuff back right before the bus left, and he went back up to Oregon. So we hardly interacted with him at all. And the dog eventually got let out of prison. He was only in for like a night or two. I don't remember what it was. But he had to do some kind of community service or take some kind of class or psychological examination. I don't remember. But it was really like, that was one level of the end of our relationship. Our relationship had been ending in stages for a while, and there was still 2 or 3 horrible events that occurred before we really stopped being friends. And I remembered years later when I saw him again after not seeing him for so long, I remembered the amazing, intense relationship we had had, and it was just gone. There was like almost no remnant of it. Like he was just a person that was, he was just a person that was like a person that I thought I should know, but I didn't. I just didn't know him. And he's like that song, Someone That I Used to Know. He was just somebody that I used to know. He was just somebody that I used to know. But there was no actual relationship anymore, no actual connection. That was a long story, wasn't it? And I did kind of tell 2 stories. I just saw actually the other story that I told spontaneously was story 35, which is an 8 and 24 is a 6. That's nice. Do you guys want me to tell one more story, or are we done for the evening? Do you feel like that's enough? Or maybe I could try to tell a shorter one? I could roll the number again. Anybody want me to tell another story? Hi, Dave. Hi, Dan. Hi, Dean. Dave Dandine. 105. The test roll I did earlier was 104. What is 105? This doesn't need to be a terribly long story. I don't need to give all the context in the world. In the year 2001, I went to Mongolia, outer Mongolia, for about 2 months. I was in Beijing for about 2 weeks on either side of the outer Mongolia trip. And right after I returned, the plane flew into the World Trade Center towers. 2001, I spent a month in an old Russian van driving around the outer Mongolian countryside with 5 homosexuals, me being one of them, 4 other homosexuals. 4 of us had spent a significant amount of our life with Indiana for some reason. In Mongolia, I went with a friend who had never spent time in Indiana. That was kind of my introduction, one of my introductions to the Radical Fairies and the Billies, and he's a good kid, traveler fellow that he is. Swiftly. So 1 month in Mongolia in a van, the second month in Mongolia riding horses. One of the gay men we found challenging, so he went off on his own because we didn't really want to be with him. I don't remember why we were so angry with him, but we were. It's nice. I'm friends with him now, so I don't know why we were so unhappy with him. But he went off on a horse trip by himself, and the other 4 of us rode horses around a big lake south of Siberia that is the sister lake to Lake Baikal. Its name is something like Lake Hovsgorod. And there is a very high mountain range separating it from Siberia. And there were lots of mountains around the lake. So I think it was like 740 kilometers, 770 kilometers, I don't exactly remember, that we rode horses around this lake. We were traveling with tents, simple, normal human tents, not crazy yurt ger things. The Mongolian word for a yurt is a ger. The yurt is the Russian word, and Russia had taken over out of Mongolia for a while. So one night, we're there in we're there in July and August. So very often during the day it was like 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and then all of a sudden it would drop down to freezing and we'd have hailstorms. Very far north. But the reason I say that it's very far north is that the sun would set at like 11:30 at night, and the sun would rise at like 3:30 in the morning or something. And of course, the dawn, the gloaming, was very long. The dusk and the dawn were very long. So one night we were camping next to an area called like the 7 Sacred Springs or something. And we had walked around them a little bit in the evening when we got there and we set up the tents. But I woke up at like 3 in the morning, and nobody else was awake. I have no idea. I don't usually wake up early. And for some reason, I woke up with a start, and it was like from a bad dream or an intense dream. And I felt a terrible urge. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what to do with that. But I knew I had to get out of my sleeping bag and get out of the tent. And I looked around with a certain amount of fear and awe, because the mountain that we were at the base of was all white gravel. Gravel would be a good way of describing it, like big gravel that you might have in a driveway, but it was all white stone. And then the top of the mountain there were like craggy, sharp type things, but still it was mostly gravel. And I don't know how tall it was. It was like, let's say 800 feet up from the level we were at already. Which may have been like a mile. I don't know. I remember that lake is super fucking deep, and the water is so clean that they were like, oh, you can drink from it without getting sick. And we did. We drank. We were kind of sick all the time anyway from that diet of... Anyway. So I get out of the tent and I feel this strange urge, and I look at the mountain, and the mountain looks like it's on fire because the sun isn't really rising yet, but the dawn, I've been watching the sunrise here a lot, as some of you know, and I always like that when the night sky is dark and it starts to get a little lighter, and then it gets really red and orange, like dramatic, and then it gets kind of boring. And then it gets beautiful sunrise colors again, and the sun comes up. So this was in that first moment where the dark had ended and there was there was this crazy orange vermilion color all through the sky, and it was making the whole white stone mountain just look like it was glowing with some strange supernatural fire. And I looked up at the mountain and I was like, I think I have to walk up the mountain a little bit. And I was like, maybe I should go to the springs. And I was like, no, I think I need to walk up the mountain a little bit. And I start walking up the mountain, and there's no path, there's nothing solid, it's all sliding. And I just keep feeling like, well, I just have to go a little higher. I just have to go, I feel this energy. I'm like, I have to go higher. And so I keep going up the mountain, going up the mountain, going up the mountain, going up the mountain until I get to the ridge. And I'm like, fuck, what time is it? Like, and when are the people going to wake up, and are they going to wonder where I am and if I'm lost? And, I felt worried on a whole bunch of levels. But at the same time, I'm like, the majesty of being up on this ridge and looking out over these mountains and the lake and the way it's stretching, it was fucking amazing, and the colors of everything. But then I look up the ridge, and then there's another level. The mountain, if you've ever been called to go up mountains, which I certainly was when I was younger. I've never been a rock climber kind of person, but when there's tall things around me, I'm always like, I wanted to get higher and higher. So I go to another level, and I go to another level, and I just keep going up. And there's a part of me that's like, fuck, dude, you have to go back down, because you don't want people to leave without you or worry about you. But I finally get to a level where there's a cairn, which is, I don't believe the Mongolian term for this. I think it's an Irish term. But it's a place where the Mongolians, also driven to go to the top of the mountains, would carry things and stack up rocks and put sheep skulls and horse skulls and yak skulls and whatever. They would stack things up, and then they would also bring this turquoisey sky blue silk up there and wrap it on things, wrap it around. So these stacks of rocks were somewhat ordered and somewhat chaotic, but they marked the idea of like a stupa, a sacred spot. Outer Mongolia was considered more holy than Tibet. And I remember meeting a Tibetan man while I was there, and he said, yes, when I was a kid, we used to, or the old people would talk about going on pilgrimage to Mongolia. And I was like, they would walk here? And he was like, yeah, they would walk here. Because there was over 400 Buddhist monasteries in Mongolia, and the Russians destroyed all of them, except one, which they only half destroyed. They didn't leave any intact. And at the time we were there, they were starting to rebuild a few of them, because Mongolia had become liberated, I think, about 10 years before that, in the early 90s. So I find this cairn, and the first time I was introduced to Tibetan Buddhism was 1999, a few years before this, and I had been taught that you were supposed to walk around a stupa 9 times. And you're supposed to do it clockwise. So I'm walking around the stupa, and after I do complete the 9 times, I feel like I should sit and meditate and receive whatever blessing I'm supposed to receive from having been up there. And again, there's a gorgeous view. There's this feeling of being one with all of creation and nature. I'm not on drugs this time. And there's this sense of being driven and called and in relationship with the spirit of the land. And the reward is just the glory and the beauty and the oneness. And I feel like I should make an offering. I mean, people would bring their animal bones up there, and people would carry things up there, and the silk and stuff. And I said, what do I have that I can leave that is a suitable offering to this beautiful place? And at this point in my life, I always had Baoding balls, which some people call Chinese medicine balls. Chinese medicine balls. Sometimes they got little bells inside. I had used snooker, what's it called? Billiard balls for a long time when I was still learning, so I didn't drop them. It didn't matter if I dropped them. And then I started buying fancy gem. I would go to the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show, and I would buy gem spheres. So I had some tiger eye spheres that I was using as Baoding balls. And I remembered in Beijing, I would walk around doing them all the time because I was kind of enjoying showing off that I was a white person who could do the Bao Ding balls. And the old Chinese men in the park were all like, oh, I want those, give me those. How much could I pay you for those? And I was like, these aren't for sale. These aren't for sale. But it was so funny that so many people were like trying to buy them from me. They wanted these tiger eye Bao Ding balls. And I decided that these were objects of worth, objects that I loved, that I had ascribed great worth to. I had magical associations with these. I felt like I used them as magical tools. What kind of magical tools, you may ask? To empower my willpower, to strengthen my willpower, third chakra, and help manifest my desires and thoughts, and will control, affect will and control over myself and the world around me. So that's kind of how I use them. When I was using them with consciousness, like I remember sometimes I'd be walking around and be like, I need to figure out where I'm going. I need to figure out how do I make this happen. And I would just be spinning the balls while thinking about it, and then it would just all fall into place and reality would just work around me. As a manifesting generator. So, and all these other people had ascribed worth to these Bao Ding balls, these tiger eye Bao Ding balls. So I was like, these are a suitable offering to this beautiful place. And I put them on the cairn and felt an immense peace. Like I had somehow done something appropriately, somehow was in accord, in integrity with what was right in the world, that I had somehow respected the gods or the spirits of the land or the entire workings of some mysticism that was beyond my understanding. But it was great peace. And then I walked back down the mountain and people were just waking up, and some of them were like, where were you? We thought you went to the springs. We were going to come find you. And I was like, no, but I'd really like to jump in the springs before we leave. So I went and I jumped in the springs, and then the sun was rising and then we left. Or the sun had risen or something. But I couldn't take pictures of it. I didn't have a camera with me. At that point in time, I didn't have a digital camera. Kwai had this amazing, the friend I was traveling with had this amazing DSLR camera that was 3 megapixels. Very cumbersome, huge, like backup hard drive systems. It was so... But yeah, it was nice. I couldn't get pictures of that. It was something nobody else on the trip saw. It was just like a very personal, private... It's not private. It was just a unique experience I got to have that was just for that moment. But it's a story worth sharing. It's a story worth telling. It's a story worth sharing. So now I have shared it. Do you have any questions about any of the stories I have told this evening? Would you like me to talk more about anything else, or would you like to have a moment and watch the waves? I will watch the waves, and I will watch for comments, questions. And then when we're done, I will turn this off. Okay, well, I guess thank you for those of you who listened and watched. I hope this was entertaining and inspiring and interesting. Again, if you have income, for those of us who don't, we're all asking for donations. So I have a donation link in the description if you want to send me any kind of money. That's nice because I won't be able to make any money doing massage for a while. Even after the social distancing measures have stopped, whenever that may be. I've talked to people in New York, they're like, I don't know when I'll feel comfortable getting on an airplane again. I don't know when I'll feel comfortable going to the movies again. I don't know when I'll... So there are people that will feel that way about massage. I saw somebody comment on Facebook today that like, well, part of social distancing, don't you understand, man? You don't get a massage during a pandemic, duh. So I'm aware of that. Anyway, new ways to make money is currently donations. And if I can do anything useful for any of you, if you want any private teaching, or I have a lot of things I like to teach and can teach. And bartering is fine for me as well, though I'm in this beautiful place. I really like teaching people, so I will say this again, that if there's a situation where I could live and work at some farm or commune or resort and teach people every morning, that would be ideal. But also living with a guy or a couple and teaching them every day for a couple weeks or months or whatever is very much in line with a version of life I would like to live for a while. I'm itinerant, I like to travel. I'm not stuck in any one location. And I'm happy to be somewhere for a period of time and then move on, because that's just how I roll. So if I can be useful, let me know. And you can always message me privately if you have any requests or interests, or comment here and maybe I'll reply to it later. But that's enough for this evening. Enjoy your sunset, enjoy your night, enjoy yourself and your silence. May you have peace and unconditional happiness. Happiness for no reason besides just the joy of being happy. Much love to you. Thank you.